Welcome. Hi. Thanks for joining us, Joyce. So we are continuing our parallel path with the House Human Services Committee in an effort to have the time we need to think deeply about this and also finish the work and go home at some point in May. And so Joyce is going to share an update with us on sort of where they are in terms of the revenue that's required. And the House Human Services Committee is, focused on the policy side, right? And so they're really, the bill that they're looking at is sort of the policy pieces that are sort of date certain for them and that they feel really clear on. And we heard really clearly yesterday, and I feel really strongly that we actually need to understand the full picture of this and not just sort of as far as this bill goes. Because the bill, as it's going to lead human services, and maybe we'll add a little bit to it, is going to also be very clear about sort of what comes next after this bill. So, right, this bill is building on the last one that put the RAND study in place and a bunch of other stuff. And so want to make sure that we're understanding next steps as we're making this step. And so I asked Joyce to also sort of take us out further from what's needed in this bill. So that's what she's going to share with us.
Yes, good morning. I'm Joyce Manchester with the Joint Fiscal Office. And I'm going to share my screen so that I can talk about numbers as usual. I like numbers, so that's a good thing.
Will you make that larger? Absolutely. Glasses too.
Yeah, I want to start. How's that? Good? Okay, so let me say that I will be talking mostly about the early care and education program that is still being debated in House Human Services. And actually, they are talking about further tweaks this morning that are not reflected in this 7-year look. I can mention some of those. They haven't voted on them yet, but they would reduce the costs in FY24 and 25 by a little bit. Okay, so let's set this up. So what I was asked to do is to look at early care and education expenditures going out and associated administrative costs and so forth and so on, going out for 7 years. So the bill, S56, currently in Human Services, only looks at FY24 and 25. And after that point, we are relying on the RAND study that sort of defined what it means to be at a high quality, accessible early care and education system. So I know what that means in terms of my modeling to go out to 100% of the RAND high quality cost of care, okay? But it is not based on an actual cost of care because we have not surveyed providers in Vermont to find out how much they would pay if they had resources to pay equivalent with training and education and so forth and so on. So I hope you understand the construct, right? The first 2 years are set by the House Human Services bill. The next 5 are based on projecting out based on the RAND report, okay? All right, so I had to make some assumptions about inflation. And of course, the world is changing and nobody's projections are up to date. And so I'm keeping things very simple. You will see in the yellow boxes my assumed inflation rate. The CCFAP rate is very dependent on wages because about 80% of their costs are dependent on wages. So you can see in the near term, I've got inflation relative to CCFAP or applied to CCFAP at 5% in FY24, it drops to 4% in FY25, and then it drops slowly back towards what we think of as normal, we hope is normal, which is maybe 2.3%. You'll see in the second line in yellow boxes, I have a slightly different inflation assumption for the deputy secretary in AOE, and that's because we know what the contract negotiation says for FY24 salaries. And we know that it's 3.9% starting this July 1st. So I put that number in. I expect over time that those two inflation rates are going to get closer together. So I'm slowly moving to that point by FY26. Okay, so let's look at the numbers. Yes, I have this orange box on the left that says as of April 18th at 5:30 p.m. So let's look at the numbers. Part 1 talks about the appropriations needed for the early care and education program, as well as after school and other pieces that are part of S56 in House Human Services. So I'm actually taking the numbers that we have projected for S56 in FY24 and 25. First, for the 0 to 4 rate and eligibility expansion. So what's in S56 is raising the family copay. Remember when we talked about the structure of CCFAP, we talked about a $25 per week copay that kicks in for families at 150 to 175%, and then multiples of $25 under the status quo up the line until you get to the end of income eligibility. So the House Human Services bill would increase $25 to $27 as the family copay with multiples of $27, right? So it goes 27, 54, blah, 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 up the line. So that's asking for a bigger contribution from families, which reduces the cost to the state from CCFAP, right? We're still talking about getting halfway to the level that I'm modeling as the RAND high quality cost of care. So we're still getting halfway there. And the implementation would take place on January 1st, 2024, meaning 6 months of higher reimbursement rate. But in fact, it takes a month plus for DCF to pay out the provider reimbursement, right? So the FY24, although you would think it's 6 months, in fact, the money going out the door is really 5 months. Okay, so that's 5 months in FY24. Then I grow the annual amount by inflation and I move forward to FY25. So that would be the annual cost in FY25 at the halfway mark, getting towards high quality of 111.7 million. Okay, so that's how that works. Then we made the assumption, the chair made the assumption that we would stay at that 50% mark, just increasing for inflation in FY26. So you see the 115, I can use my cursor, there we go. In FY27, we are assuming here that the state will be ready to implement public full day, full school year, public pre-K. So we're keeping early care and education at the 50% rate for 1 more year. And then in the following year, we bump up to 75% of the way to the high quality reimbursement rate. And in FY29, we're at 100%. And you can see $246 million at that point, and then growing by inflation. Okay, so these are big numbers, but it's an investment.
Yeah. Can I just ask a question? I mean, it's a dumb one, but so I know children are born all year long. So we've got first grade is roughly the 6-year-olds. Working backward, kindergarten is roughly the 5-year-olds. So preschool would be roughly the 4-year-olds.
Correct.
And everybody below age 4, more or less, would be still in home care or daycare.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, except we call it early care and education, but yes.
Yeah, right. I remember that too. It's tough to
I know, it's hard. Yes,
Okay.
that's right.
Okay, so this, well, you're talking about right now is who?
It's just 0 to 4.
0 to 4.
0 to 4, it's the early care and education.
Okay.
And you're going to see below, is your mind going to public pre-K, and that should reduce the cost of early care and education.
Yes.
And we will come to that line, maybe I should have bumped it up, but we will come to the line that says CCFAP offset from public pre-K.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yes.
yes. Okay.
So that's the amount that I'm estimating would not be needed for early care and education because many, many 4-year-olds are in public pre-K.
Does that money stay in the pockets of parents or in the taxpayers' pockets?
So what I'm modeling is the state expenditure. and the state expenditure for CCFAP would be less because those reimbursements are smaller. But of course, the state would be paying for public pre-K at that point. Yeah. So we'll see how that offsets in just a minute.
And that's
And just a clarification before any of you further, so we are just talking about part one of this table right now. And then Pat
Oh, yes,
will talk
right.
about a whole bunch of stuff, and then we'll talk about part two after.
For line
I can't.
one, part one, right?
Yes.
Part one, part two is gonna be after Pat.
Yeah, I wish I could block it out somehow. I don't know
Just,
how.
that's just attempt to not be distracted.
Yes,
Okay, sorry, Pat.
okay.
And the public pre-K would be added to ed fund, and so that's like a whole separate.
Funding, et cetera, et cetera. Yes. Yes, so I'm talking about general fund in part one. Yeah. Okay, S56 in-house human services also includes a rate and enrollment expansion for the school age CCFAP program. Some people call it after school and summer care. Some people call it school age care, whichever. And you'll see that on line 2. I should have put in line numbers. That would have been very useful. But you can see that's about 10 million going forward. And that we assume would stay at 50% of the way towards the high quality cost of care based on the RAND report. But that's an assumption for this table.
Joyce, just like for that school age summer and after school care, that's direct to the school?
No, it would be to the provider, whoever the provider is.
Oh, right, sorry, this is for like kids who
CCFAP.
leave school, goes to the center down the road for the
Yes.
afternoon or the summer. For some sites, very care providers that.
It's also, so adult age, we have, the Human Services Committee has sort of put this expansion into this bill and questions about whether or not it belongs here, but the, after school, and we can take a little bit of testimony on it, but so after school and summer, like includes summer camps. It's like the Y program that might be housed in the public school, but is actually contracted, sort of hosted by the school, but it's not a school program. All of those are eligible for CCFAP funding for school age kids.
So I have a 7-year-old and there's a week's vacation and I need to work and I find a place that will take my child that costs money and I think I'm eligible, I can receive CFAP reimbursement.
Even for your 10-year-old.
Or a summer program that might be run by the school, might be run by somebody else who's eligible
I'd say probably
for-
not run by the school, but might be run by a Y or a
Up to how old? 12.
both. Well,
The rec department.
yeah, the rec department.
Okay, thank you.
Jessica, would you like to jump in?
I'd just like to
Yeah.
say something.
Will you identify yourself for the record?
Yes, sorry, this is Jessica Brunstad, representative from Shelburne and St. George. And the reason that we added summer, I agree with the chair, that it's a little bit interesting. But part of the reason is that when we move to as we move to public pre-K, then we need to cover the afternoons and summers. It's not full-time, full like the way that we have it in childcare. And so we felt that it was important to make sure that all the system is together so that parents can understand what we're headed. So.
Yes, and I would rather we don't go too deep into a policy.
Yeah, no, just
Okay,
a
cool,
quick
great, go
question,
for
it's
it.
really just about structure, so and that money funnels through Vermont After School, is that right?
Asking the CCABP.
Okay,
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'm only looking at the state program, which is CCFAP,
Okay.
in this table. Well, that's not exactly true, but in that line, I'm looking at CCFAP. Okay. The third line there looks at CDD, Child Development Division Administration, both internal and a potential contract in order to handle more families being eligible and we hope more providers offering more slots. So originally,
Could you just explain why it's like 6 million for 5 months and then goes down to 4? Is there like a one-time contract there?
yes, and in fact, there have been some last minute changes So this was as of 5:30 last night. $6 million was going to be appropriated in FY '24 for sprucing up the computer system and hiring more staff and so forth and so on. I believe this morning it was discussed. Has it been voted on?
Well, it's the latest version.
Not yet.
Seems to be
Okay.
supported.
Okay, the latest version would drop that 6 million to 4 million. So it would be 4 million ongoing, and I've grown the 4 million by inflation going forward. That's for administrative purposes at DCF. Next, we have talked previously, I believe, about the readiness payments that would allow providers to maybe start hiring new people, or maybe start raising their wages and benefits, or maybe renovate their space to allow them to accept more kids. So this started at 25 million as of 5:30 last night. It was still at 25 million. As of this morning, it has been reduced to 18.873235 million. And there's a reason for that. That has to do with available funding. Okay.
And this is grants to centers.
Hence, they wouldn't have to apply. It might be,
It's not grants.
No.
It's time recording, payments.
To existing centers.
We're working to be ready.
And we're gonna be able to, when we get the bill, we'll be able to like get into some of the weeds of how they're spending the money. I just want us to understand the money that's being spent and how it might move across 6 years. I know this is a sort of weird 7 years. This is sort of a weird, slightly backward way to do this, but that's just like
okay.
why we have lots of tables and charts to help us with the weird backwards way.
The next line looks at quality incentive and capacity payments, and that would be ongoing, because remember, that's the idea that if you're at 5 stars, you would get an incentive payment to help you stay there. And if you're moving from 3 stars to 4 stars, you would get an incentive payment because you made the move. So that would be ongoing. Oh, I see in the latest version, that has been cut to $10 million per year. Okay, so this table will be updated.
Okay, so that's 10 million.
10 million growing, yes. Representative Bodie?
Well, I have an issue here, which is, are we not, we heard testimony yesterday that said, do this and solve it. Don't just do it part way. Now, why are all these amounts going down? Is it because we want the numbers to be smaller, or are we going to be able to do this fully in the right way?
So I think, so what we're looking at, so the bill, and no one has, I think, ever proposed that this bill in front of us would go the whole way. But I think there's broad acknowledgement that there's sort of step 3. This is step 2, this bill. Step 3 would hypothetically need to go the whole way, and that's what we heard very clearly yesterday. And that's why I've asked Joyce to build us out past the timeline that the bill recommends.
So, okay, so when you're saying past the timeline for the bill, then will those amounts, are those amounts the amounts that are actually needed, or are they based on this cuts that are happening right now?
So my opinion is that we won't know exactly how much is needed for the quality incentive and capacity payments until we have some experience with the program going forward. Right?
You know, the only thing I have to say about that, if I can say one more thing, is I really worry about saying we're going to commit to a system and then underfunding the system.
Right.
And then it's going to be like a nightmare, like a lot of things.
Yes, as it would be a nightmare for the fiscal office, as you can imagine. But that is exactly why the chair asked us to look at this 7-year plan, to think about what it means to go all the way to 100% by FY '29 in this example.
And so so the bill goes to FY '27, basically. And so in FY '28, we're starting to say, what does it take to move towards the RAND recommendations?
Okay. All right. Now, no matter what we do in 24, 25, 26, we won't really change those 28, 29. 30, because our goal is to get to the RAND.
I mean, that's what doing the whole thing would be. I don't know, I'll share the same goal, but that's what doing the whole thing would be.
Yes, okay.
I'm good. There are other. Nolan.
For the record, Nolan Nyhol, the Joint Fiscal Office, and to sort of address Representative O's, one of her concerns about fiscal year 24, that was coming down because they were trying to operate within a specified budget. So if you see that it's the new needs funded is 8.1 million, they were trying to get to zero for 24, because that's what they were trying.
Who was trying to get to zero?
The committee was trying to, you see under the needed new funding under fiscal year 24, it's 8,126,000. They were trying to get to zero, so they would be working within a budget.
I see.
That's why some of the numbers in fiscal year 24 were coming down.
And fiscal year 24 is on some level sort of like a transition temporary year. It's not like the fixing of the system year.
Okay.
I think there's always been an expectation that we would need to raise revenue to make improvements in the system. And fiscal year 24 is within an existing revenue sources. I'd love to have Joyce finish explaining that before we ask you to come back. In the interest of using her energies best.
Okay, thank you. I'm now on the line that says Pre-K Implementation Committee. In the Human Services Bill, there would be a committee formed to think hard about implementing public pre-K in FY27. And some of the members of that committee would receive per diems, those members who are not paid by their employer to be on the committee. And the committee is also allowed to hire a contractor to help them work through their issues. So that's all that committee. And it only exists for 18 months. So it's a full year in FY24 and then a half year in FY25. Now, the CCFAP offset from public pre-K is my preliminary estimate. I should have said all of these numbers are preliminary estimates because it would be nice to have more time to let them sink in and really do our due diligence on the table. But in any event, this is really preliminary. This is my thinking that public pre-K is only 35 weeks per year and it's only maybe 6 hours a day. So working parents need wraparound care or after school care or whatever you want to call it, and they need summer care and vacation care. So moreover, let's see. The general assumption is that about 80% of 4-year-olds nationwide attend public pre-K if it's offered. It's not mandatory in the bill. It's offered, and we hope that most kids will attend. I'm assuming that CCFAP children and families are already committed to having the parents at work. And so it seems more likely to me that they would attend the public pre-K, but there may be some folks who have their child care provision down the street and they can't arrange transportation to the public pre-K and so forth. So I'm assuming 90% of the CCFAP enrollees would attend public pre-K 35 weeks a year, 6 hours a day, and the rest of the time still sits with CCFAP. The way CCFAP works, I think we mentioned this before, is that they either pay full-time or part-time. And full-time is more than 26 hours a week. Part-time is less than 26 hours a week. So while the children are in public pre-K, they would need part-time CCFAP reimbursement, right? So I put all these assumptions together and I've come up with an offset that is about, 9.8 million and then growing over time. So, and that it's really 8.3%, I think, of the CCFAP expenditure. And so as the CCFAP 0 to 4 grows, so too does the 8.3% in terms of dollars, right? So that's why you see that growing over time. Okay, and finally in this block, we have the AOE Deputy Secretary, which is part of the S56 in Human Services. And as I said, that's a salary plus benefits amount, and then it grows at the inflation assumptions above. So you add all those things up and you get the total estimated appropriation, which starts at about 80 million and grows to 146 million and continues to increase. You'll notice a dip down in FY27 when the CCFAP offset kicks in, right? Because I'm only thinking about state expenditures on the general fund. So you have the drop from 150 to 144. The House put aside 21.68 million in one-time money for childcare and also uses 50 million ongoing. And we're assuming that grows with inflation. So those are the next two lines. And then we come up with our needed new funding, which now looks like 8.1 million. But as you heard, some of the numbers in the FY24 column will be adjusted so that that will look like zero. Good?
Everyone understands that.
The last thing I didn't understand. That last thing that you said, I didn't understand. Where's the 26 million that you said is there? I only see 21,680.
I said 26 million.
Maybe you didn't.
I said,
Will you use your arrow bit?
yes. So I'm talking about the total, if you add up the FY24 appropriations, the total is about 80 million, minus the 21.68, minus the 50. Those two items are set aside in the House budget for early care and education.
Well, we already passed this.
Yes, yes. And so we are left with 8.1 that needs to be funded, except that this morning, Human Services Committee reduced those amounts, remember? So the 25 drops to something like 18 and the 6 drops to 4.
And I would sort of remind us that FY25 is our problem and FY24 isn't really our problem.
Yes.
FY24 is important because in some cases it's setting a base that's being built on, but mostly our problem begins now. Our responsibility becomes opportunity. Our opportunity, our jurisdiction, whatever word we want to use on this delightful Wednesday morning begins in FY25, not FY24.
Yes, and please recall in FY25, this morning, the 20 million was cut to 10 million. So that would drop the bottom line from 93.8 down to 83.8.
Yes. Can you just explain again the AOE deputy secretary and why they're in here?
I can't hear you.
The bottom line on the expenses, the AOE deputy secretary, and why it fits exclusively here?
Yes, so I'm not the expert on this, but I believe the explanation is that AOE will be taking on public pre-K. And they also have some responsibility for 0 to 4 educational, blah, blah, blah. So this would be a new deputy secretary to sort of raise those issues.
This would be like a solely focused on early ed senior staff position.
I think so, but we could check on that in the bill, in the human services bill. And I've heard it's possible that that person might need a staff. So going forward, you might think there could be another position or two, but that's not in the bill currently. I think we're stopping there for now, correct? Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the sort of challenge we are tackling. Yes.
Okay, and like, once we get to FY30, then we're like, we sort of, I mean, we'll probably learn a lot between now and then.
I hope so.
The idea is like, this is a big ramp up and then we're there and we sort of, it's all working great, there's slots for everyone, and that's sort of like our.
And then we just have inflation.
Yeah.
Or deflation, who knows, it's 2030. Yes.
So Joyce, can you just put into words for us, I see a big jump here from right now, it says a little over 8 million up to 211 million. Can you put into words for us why that happens?
Absolutely. So as you know, currently, families are unable to afford early care and education, and providers can't pay their staff a reasonable wage based on their training and education and experience and so forth. And so we have this market failure, the early childhood system. And so this is what it would take for the state to commit to getting to a high-quality, accessible early care and education system based on the RAND report.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's the point that Representative Beck and myself worry over, whether the incentive payments are sufficient inducement to make sure money goes into the wage bill and the elevation in benefits, wages, and the quality of staff. But that's the only, if you will, lever at the moment built into this to assure that as we get out to, say, FY27, when we have both an expanded private system and a much more robust public pre-K system, whether the two, if you will, stars or quality of the delivery systems in the two reach some sort of parity?
There's a number of policy levers in the bill, and I imagine that there might be other policy levers considered in order to do that. That's sort of like outside of Joyce's jurisdiction, so I'm going to save her from that.
I do know that there's a report to the committees of jurisdiction, I believe it's December of 24, to see how the providers of early care and education have used the increased reimbursement and the readiness payments, the quality incentive payments and so forth. So that's an attempt to say, where's the money going and is it going to the things that matter for high quality early care and education?
And there are other policy levers in there that we can talk about.
That's okay, because whatever evolves in that first 3 years will revise the reality check of the numbers. And that's our problem, is the numbers. But behind that is the 80% staff cost that you built into the model.
Absolutely.
And I would offer that I don't think it's just your Representative Beck's concerns. It's very important to me that the money gets to wages and to
For sure.
Savings for families and not to random investment firms grants, for instance. So I think that's going to be some of our work on the bill. Other questions about the table that Joyce has? Us. Okay. Thank you very much, Joyce.
Thank you.
And I know this might be going into people's way back memory machine, but we did, there is folks are welcome to watch on YouTube the presentation from the RAND about the study. If the study is a little too much reading. So that's on our, that's in our YouTube. So Sorsha can find the link for us if you wants to charge it themselves.
And speaking of which, how was it decided, so I've been gone for a while, okay? How was it decided that the RAND report was the goal?
So last biennium, time is so hard since the pandemic, it's just wild. Last biennium, so there was sort of a series of different bills focused on this, and the last one put into place a goal that no family would pay more than 10%, like a promise and stuff, that no family would pay more than 10% of their income towards childcare, and we were on track for an affordable, accessible, high-quality childcare system. And the study to understand how much that would actually cost us was commissioned from RAND.
Okay. So
And JFO supervised the study, so it was sort of like JFO doing the work, but not JFO. Outsourcing some expertise on it.
okay, thanks.
Yep. It wasn't a private sector commissioned report, it was a JFO commissioned report, and JFO worked really closely with them. And with that, Pat, do you want to join us?
I will be listening, and if you need me to come back, I will.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am Patrick Sitterton, and I am also with the Joint Fiscal Office. So today, we're going to take a little departure right now. So I know you all are going to have a lot of questions about the specifics of the childcare policy. But what I'm going to talk to you all about right now is sort of a proposal for funding it that we were given some guiding principles for how a system could be structured to fund this program, and sort of working within those bounds, sort of collaboratively, we've come up with a sort of option to put forth to you all. You will see when we get to the end of it that you will still have some thinking that you need to do, especially when comparing it to all that information that Joyce just provided you all. But what I have for you today is, I believe Sorsha has posted on the committee's website some slides. I'm not sure what they were titled. Is it just childcare financing? Okay. Keep it simple. So this first bullet you see here, this ballpark this is not the exact number, but the range we were looking at as the bill came out of the Senate. So this is not including all of the discussions that Human Services is having right now. But, we were talking about somewhere in the range of $100 million, give or take some here or there. And sort of those guiding principles that we wanted to focus on when looking at a sort of alternative option for funding this program was, you want to make sure that you have a broad base. By having a broad base, you're helping ensure that you have sort of stable funding for that program, which is particularly important for something like this because this is a long-term endeavor, right? You're going to have ongoing costs for this every year that you need to make sure that you're meeting those needs for every year. So if we have a downturn in the economy, you want to make sure that you're sort of insulating yourself so that, one downturn doesn't throw the whole system out of whack, right? There is often an inclination to want to be incredibly clever and make up these incredibly complex systems that target exactly the people you want to be paying. But in reality, the easiest to administer and the easiest to understand systems are those that are focused on simplicity. That makes the taxpayer's life easier from a logistical standpoint. It makes the tax department's life easier as well.
And I would add that for something on this scale, I think we also need public to understand what we're doing here. And I think we heard that sort of quite clearly from the business community that joined us yesterday for customers. So I think that's another reason for simplicity I heard from the folks that have applied and wanted. They want to sort of they're very happy to pay more taxes towards this, but they want to make sure that they know where their money is going and where it's coming from. Yeah.
And that it sufficiently solves the problem.
That sufficiently solves the problem.
And so those comments are actually a great segue into this next bullet point is that, in understanding what the money's going towards and, why are we paying these taxes, you want to make sure that the people who are benefiting from it, both directly, like households with children who would use these programs, to businesses with employees who maybe they don't have to miss work because they have to attend to unexpected childcare issues, right? So you'll see as we go through each point that each part of the proposal that we're looking at here ties back to, are they benefiting from the system, right? And the last piece here is vertical equity or ability to pay. If we're raising taxes, you want to make sure that especially lower income households, this is not some undue burden on them that they simply can't afford or is making them worse off compared to the current system we have now without any of these changes, right? So those are sort of the big four kind of guiding principles here that we'll try and tie back to as we go through each step of this. So as it came out of the Senate, and this is sort of where we get our general ballpark of dollars here, they were funding this program through sort of two pieces. The first piece was sort of bringing back that foregone revenue from the child tax credit. Bringing that back in, so it's actual revenue that's coming in. So by cutting that program, Joint Fiscal Office estimated that that would be about $31.8 million annually. I suspect and will be very interested to see as the data comes in from the tax department what that actually ends up looking like. I hope everyone remembered to file yesterday. And so that was starting immediately to cover initial costs in fiscal year 24 that were in that particular bill. The other piece they had, which started rolling out in the second year, and so starting in fiscal year 25, there was a payroll tax. We've had lots of conversations about the payroll tax in this committee, so I think you're all well versed. But the difference in theirs compared to what we saw with paid leave was their rate was at 0.42%. And that went up to 100%, not 200% like you had before, 100% of the Social Security taxable maximum, which is $160,000 roughly for 2023. So combined in 24.
Does that 160,200, does that grow with inflation every year?
That is adjusted every year by the IRS.
Some CPI index or something.
Yeah, and Joyce would be able to tell you the exact index that they use, but it's, they do adjust it, just like they adjust tax brackets.
So that means the taxpayer would be paying as much in Social Security as he paid, that this new payroll tax, he would be paying as much as he pays Social Security and the employer too? Is that what, I don't understand that, I guess.
So, okay, so the way that this would be a state payroll tax, right? So what you pay for Medicare and the payroll tax for Medicare and Social Security, that's taken out on the federal level. So this is a separate payroll tax. So I guess if your question is this additive to this payroll taxes that taxpayer that workers already pay to the federal government? The answer to that question is yes. The way that the Senate had the imposition of the tax split was that employers had to pay 75% of that tax.
Yeah.
And then the remaining 25%, they would withhold on every paycheck from employees and remit back to the tax department on their behalf. Does that kind of answer your question?
So I don't understand what the 0.42% means.
So if you're making $15 an hour, 0.42 of that is going to be taxed.
It's going to be taxed or taxed?
Taxed. So I don't have a calculator right now, but if you just take what your wage earnings are, and you just multiply that by 0.42%, that would be what the tax amount is.
I see. Okay, on wages and self-employment income. Self-employment income. I skipped over that.
Yeah.
Up to, I see what you're talking about now. All right. That's what I get for skimming.
It's all right.
So now what is the 82.8 million?
That is what Joint Fiscal Office has estimated to be the revenue raised from levying that payroll tax.
Okay.
And for that year. So as wages grow, you would expect to see 0.42% raising more money. Likewise, theoretically, if we hit a recession and unemployment skyrockets and nobody's working, you would see that estimated revenue drop.
Yes.
So it's all tied to the wage base.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Can I just make sure I understand? So if somebody's earning $100,000 a year, they would pay 0.42% of that 100,000, and they would also pay the Social Security tax to the feds.
Yep.
If they were earning 170,000 above the maximum, they would still only take the 0.42% on 160,
Yep, so the
Not on,
160 is a cap. So any earnings above that level are not subject to this tax.
to either this or the social security tax, both, that they're not subject.
That's right. That's right, yeah.
It seems like we do that for a bunch of things. Can you explain why we exclude income above that from?
Well, so I think we had a little bit of this discussion, and this is probably not the only reason, around when we were talking about paid leave. So in that program, there was a cap in what you could receive in benefits. And as you keep going up the income scale, the further up you get, the further away from the maximum amount of benefits you can receive compared to what you're putting in is. So in that light, it can be sort of viewed, even though it's somewhat of a regressive mechanism, right? It can somewhat be viewed as a fairness question.
Does that Social Security taxable maximum align with where we're drawing a line for CCFIP subsidies?
That I do not know the answer to, but.
And so when we passed federal, so we're going deep on payroll tax, which is the Senate's proposal, not necessarily the House's proposal. Which one?
Signal, don't spend too much time on this, we're not doing it.
And, the family medical leave bill that we passed out of this committee, right, helped double the Social Security taxable maximum. One of the sort of like juice squeeze conversations about that is, I think a lot of taxpayers feel safer knowing there's some cap, and there's not that much money over will you talk about that part instead of maybe?
Sure.
Okay.
We did a run for the House General Committee when they were having the discussion about paid leave. And one of the things they wanted us to look at was what's the difference in the tax rate if we go from 100% of the taxable maximum to 200% of the tax maximum. By increasing to 200% of the taxable maximum, we were able to lower the rate by 0.02%. So it's really, by going up to 100% of the taxable maximum, you're really gathering the bulk of income at that point.
Because as we've talked about in the context of the S-45 extensively, a huge amount of at some point over wage income leaves wage income and moves into other income sources generally when you get over $160,000. Most people who earn income over $160,000 aren't getting it through wages, they're getting it through stock or bonuses or pass-through entities or investments or whatever it is, but it's.
Let's give them.
Maybe if they're lucky.
Did you say sports betting?
Yeah.
Not in Vermont unless the Senate finishes their work. That still seems to be floating through over there, so.
And responsibly, of course.
And responsibly, of course.
So we'll see very quickly and with one click of a button that we're going to depart from the payroll tax here for the rest of the presentation. So using those guiding principles that we talked about a couple slides ago, there's sort of a three-pronged package here that we worked with to sort of get us into that same ballpark. Where do we think we need to be landing in terms of revenue raise? Again, you'll see with the changes from the Human Services Committee that there's still going to be some thinking on your part that you'll have to do. But there's three parts of this. The first is increasing the top marginal corporate bracket from 8.5% to 10%. And I think you have received testimony yesterday from businesses indicating that businesses do benefit from their workers having access to childcare. A big part of that is they don't have to miss work because of unexpected childcare issues. The second piece here is increasing each personal income tax bracket rate, it's a mouthful, by 0.5%. So this is where we get into, this is a simple step. It creates a broad base, so you have reliability and sustainability in your tax base for this program. And it would, that's a way to ensure that all beneficiaries are paying into the system. Just like with, for personal income tax side, households are getting a direct benefit from having access to childcare. Previously with corporate income tax, again, they have an indirect impact or indirect benefit that they receive. Yes.
So do people who are unemployed not get to use this program?
If people are
You
unemployed,
said that it's ensuring that all benefit recipients are paying in. So somebody who's not paying in, they don't get to send their kid to preschool?
well, no, I wouldn't say that's quite right. I think
That's what it says here.
You do actually, we can get more testimony about CCFAP eligibility, but right now, CCFAP eligibility is actually available for folks who aren't working under fairly limited circumstances.
Okay, so this isn't true. It's not just that benefit recipients are paying in. Others are participating. Others are benefit recipients, even though they're not paying in.
And I guess the way I read that is that there are direct benefit recipients, right? Like folks who are actively receiving childcare, but we all benefit from childcare. Employers benefit from childcare. That's like what all the testimony is about. So we're all benefits. Older people benefit from childcare because both their grandchildren are well cared for, and it lowers costs in the K-12 system if we have quality early care education, all those things.
And those workers, those people who have children who need to go to preschool, who are receiving help because they're not working or can't work or whatever, those children can go to preschool.
Let's get more testimony about eligibility. Because in some cases, yes, in some cases, actually, no, unfortunately, because of federal stuff. I'll get some testimony on that.
Okay.
so. Maybe if I were to slightly amend the bullet point, I would label it as would ensure that benefit recipients are paying into the system to the extent that they pay income taxes or taxes in general.
And we are good. Each of these bullet points is going to have like a whole bunch of slides,
Yeah.
right?
I think there might be like
This is like a
35, 40 slides.
Okay.
So buckle up.
And so let's think of this as a table of contents for the presentation we're about to have.
This goes off of this.
Then let's not. Okay, go.
But it's about something that we heard yesterday, which then I had a question about, but I didn't ask because I didn't think that they would have the answer to. But yesterday several people said, if we're paying on payroll, it's an expense. Were they saying that because they could deduct that expense? Is my first question. And then the second question is, they were all businesses that were for profit, so I wonder, what about the nonprofits? Not making profit, then how can they deduct?
That's a very good philosophical question for at the end of the presentation.
All right, good.
I think that'll kind of delve into the realm of, like I mentioned, that when we get to the end, you'll have some more thinking that changes.
And the reason it came to mind is it's just increase the top corporate income tax bracket rate to 10%. When they pay that tax, income tax, I'll wait. I'm sure I'll find out later whether it's deductible.
All right.
On that specific question, I'm going to ask Abby.
Okay.
Just to make sure that I'm not saying the wrong thing.
Okay.
So the third prong of this package here is to increase the EITC. And the reason that we're doing that here gets back to the vertical equity or ability to pay question. The EITC is received by lowest income, working households in the state. So, basically this mechanism here is we're offsetting this tax increase for those lowest income Vermonters through the EITC, which I know you've heard me talk a lot about. So unless there are specific questions.
And just telling you that the governors ask for one of the main governors asks that credits come in with in the EITC this year. To 45%.
I'm also holding from Joyce Manchester the part of the proposal which deletes the child tax credit. So that frankly, this is the remainder of help for low-income folks because the child tax credit will be gone. The state.
Child tax credit will not be gone under this proposal.
Oh,
This
okay.
committee worked very hard on that child tax credit, and it was put in
hear you.
law, it was not in session law, it was intended to be permanent. If it was intended to be temporary, it would have been in session law or had a sunset. It was neither in session law, nor did it have a sunset, and it has had some great impacts. This proposal maintains the child tax credit.
Okay.
Thank you for wondering. So that previous.
But Joyce's numbers didn't.
That's right.
Which just made really understood the proposal.
Oh, boy.
So yes, that's correct. This does not assume any change to any part of the child tax credit. This is maintaining that assumed tax expenditure that we'll have to provide that benefit. So with that, let's dive into this first pillar that we have here, which is increasing the top corporate tax rate to 10%. So I got this little box that's annoying. Let's see, there we go. So Vermont, like the federal government, treats taxes on net income or profit, depending on how a business is structured. There's two kind of key distinctions here. The first one is corporations or C corps. They're subject to a corporate income tax. Vermont has its own tax bracket schedule for C corp. Now I have that. I'll slide in maybe one or two slides from here. So we can see that the second one is passed through businesses, which I know Ted's actually been in here quite a bit recently to talk to you all about. But they're structured differently and they're not subject to the corporate income tax. So we'll kind of circle back to pass-throughs after we talk about C corps, because that will then tie into the next section that we have to talk about. So it'll sort of be a web that we're kind of working through. So things are connected and they're not always perfectly sequential, but
And
hopefully.
one of the businesses that came in yesterday.
Okay, so the key distinction for pass-throughs is that they're not subject to corporate income tax. Their owners pay based on the personal income tax structure. So currently Vermont provides a 8.5% or applies, not provides, an 8.5% tax rate on net corporate income above $25,000. So this is of the whole corporation. You think that includes it's the parent company and all its subsidiaries, sort of applied to the whole family there. Now there was a significant change prior to 2023 before Vermont had calculated what that net income was that was attributable to Vermont activities on a three-factor formula, which had to do with the share of payroll, property, and sales that were done in Vermont relative to what those same factors were nationally. And then, so the big change there was that beginning in January of 2023, Vermont has adopted the single sales factor. And I bring this up to highlight more so it can be difficult to compare state to state because there is a mixture of states, some doing sort of a single sales factor like what we have now, and other sort of formulas like what was done previously in Vermont. So just keep that in mind, not necessarily, it's more sort of a top level summary and not sort of a deep dive that we'll go into on those because it's very complicated.
But what I would offer is, I think a lot of the reason that we did this last biennium, right, was a real interest in ensuring that Vermont corporations that were really like located here and, had people and property here, and we're paying taxes in other ways, we're not carrying an undue portion of the tax responsibility, and that corporations who were not sort of investing in other ways here had more responsibility.
I don't know what single sales factor means.
That is gonna take a few hours to explain, I think, probably, and so we can find a way for the folks who did not go deep in the weeds last year to catch up on that.
So
And when we devise that, I would love to be included.
Yes, thank you for the flag.
I guess maybe a real simplified explanation I'll give is for single sales factor, you're really just looking at the income a business receives from their sales of their products attributable to sales done in the state of Vermont. So if you have a Vermont-based company that, let's say you have a company in Vermont that makes Olympic rowing oars, but they sell those oars to colleges out of state, other countries for their Olympic teams, so that kind of stuff. They're not doing the bulk of their sales business in the state. They would actually probably see a benefit from this because of a lot of their income is not directly attributable to sales in Vermont, even though they're heavily invested in building their factory here, paying local employees to work in the state, which under the previous version, that would subject them to a greater proportion, most likely. The opposite being you have a business that is located in out of state, but they do a ton of business selling goods into Vermont, right? So they might see sort of the opposite, where they might see a little bit of an increase. So it has to do with where the sales are attributable to, if that makes sense. And that's a super simplified version. I'm sure if I said something wrong, Abby will be in my ear. So moving ahead, this is sort of what the corporate income tax schedule looks like now. It includes the annual minimum tax. This is really just for reference for everyone. The rate here that will be changing is at 8.5, which would go up to 10%. And remember, these are marginal rates, so the only income subject to that 10% would be income above 25,000, net income above that level. Everything below would still be subject to the same existing tax rates that we have now. So looking at other states, there are 44 states that have a corporate income tax. 15 of these states, including Vermont, have different rates that apply to different brackets. There is a wide range of both the number of brackets. Before I say that, so from 44 down to 15, that means 29 states, I think that math's right. They just have a single percent that applies to all net income, corporate net income. The 15 states I'm talking about have a bracketed schedule like Vermont does. But again, those brackets are very different from state to state, like different rates applying to different levels of income. So it can be a little bit difficult to compare states' brackets to each other. And then also keep in mind that difference between the single sales factor and where we were before. So Vermont's current 8.5 top marginal corporate rate starts at 25,000. Currently other states, so what I did was I looked at other states at the 25,000 level and what rates they have at that particular level. Now they may have rates above that level. That may be sort of their lowest rate, but so at that level, California, Delaware, Illinois, Minnesota, and Pennsylvania all have higher taxes than our 8.5% at that particular level. Again, a lot of them have rates, brackets above with higher rates. So at 10% at $25,000, Vermont would have the highest marginal rate applied to income at $25,000. And New Jersey would be the only state that had a higher corporate income corporate income tax rate. Jeez. But that only applies to income above $1 million. So it's much higher than the 25,000 that we have here. So if we want to look at how that rate change affects businesses in Vermont, what this table here shows you would be the net change because of the increase in that rate. So this is not total corporate income tax returns. This is just the net increase in revenue that we'd be talking about. You see, we've got about 14,000 C Corp filers, right? Looks like about 12,000 of that 14,000 are below 25,000. So they're not going to see any change here to their, as long as they're below that threshold, they won't see a change to their corporate income tax rate. It really is once you get above that level that you see any new income coming in. And really, it's once you get to $1 million of net income where you see the bulk of this $19.3 million estimate. So 15.5 million of the 19.3 we would expect to be attributed to about 208 companies, all with net income above $1 million. Right?
The corporate income, is that the same as corporate profits? Are we taxing income or net profits?
So it's taxing net income.
Net income meaning?
You can kind of use it as a synonym for profits, but it's not quite the same. But you have the right thought.
So can you tell us what it is?
So you have all of your gross income, right? You sell all of your goods, all your services. You're then able to, so then you deduct or reduce that amount to get to net income with your costs of goods sold, your payroll, any expenses that you have. So after you take your gross profit, you reduce it by your expenses, that difference there is what you were looking at. And that's sort of a simplified version.
Are you calling that net income or profit?
We're calling it net income.
But regular people might call it profit. Not that you're not there, you're extraordinary.
What can you do? What could a corporation do to come in to be just under $1 million with their costs, payroll and expenses? Would paying their, under this scheme with that idea, paying taxes be something that would be an expense, paying corporate taxes?
Let's back up to the bracket. It's not, these aren't brackets, these are net income groups. So it could be moving into a different bracket. I just want to make sure you got that part of the question.
I don't think that's it.
So yes, what we're showing here is similar to when we show a change in income tax, or we sort of stratify people by their AGI. So here we're sort of showing you the number of entities that have net income within these buckets. So if you have over $1 million in net income, that means after you've sold all your goods and you've deducted all your expenses and filed your taxes, that is the amount that is subject to this tax that we're talking about here.
But the bracket is for everyone over 25.
Yes, so we can come back to here. So this is how the bracket structure breaks out. So this is, I mean, if you're making $500,000 net income as a C Corp, 475 of that would be taxed at 10%. And then, the income below that would be subject to these other marginal rates here.
We're gonna wait a second.
I'm trying to figure out what you just said. Okay. Trying to let that sink in.
Okay, you let it sink in. Do you want to go back to the next one that we're on? Okay. Representative Beck, Representative Anthony, and then after slide 12, we're gonna take a break.
So I think this can expense property and income taxes. question you asked, which is a good one, and maybe Abby is listening here, but can a business expense its state corporate income tax against its federal liability?
That's
think
what
that's
I'm
the
asking,
question.
yeah.
I don't know the answer, but maybe Abby's listening.
Just to remind myself, because I made an error and Commissioner Bolio corrected me, this is only for C Corps, not for S.
That's correct.
And point two, the alternative, and I think this is demonstrated by other states' choice, instead of leaving the number of brackets fixed, you create at a particular level you choose the fourth bracket at 10%. At this time, all we're doing is changing the 8.5 to 10, but leaving the three brackets. So that's the other alternative in the name of vertical equity.
Yeah, and I think it's New Jersey, but the way so they have brackets, but each time you trip over the next bracket, and I want to double check on this. Each time you trip over the next bracket, the entire income amount is subject to that new tax rate.
Yeah,
not just the marginal amount. And there it trips over, and I believe it makes the entire amount. So which I think is kind of what you're getting.
I was referring to a change in the marginal rate over a trigger that you choose for a fourth bracket.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah.
And I think when Graham did the modeling for this, that wouldn't have been sufficient.
Yeah, so I mean, just looking at this here, you can see that the majority of the revenue we're raising here is from a small slice of this population. I don't know the exact percentage, but it looks like it's about 75% to 80% of the expected revenue raise is coming from just about 200 entities who are the highest earners or highest.
It's whatever. I don't think you probably get this number right now, but I would really like to know of those 208, maybe even above 500,000, what percentage of those businesses and what percentage of those taxes are collected by C Corps that are headquartered in Vermont?
I can look into it. My only I'll probably have to ask the tax department if they can give me that information.
I don't want to know the
right.
Just percentage and not dollars. Yeah.
And my memory of us trying to uncover that when we were doing all the changes last biennium was that we weren't able to get to that.
I think what we were not able to get at was that AMT question of who's, but I think the tax can give us that information.
Okay.
And I can ask.
Representative Anthony, Representative Oding, or we can go to the next.
Just to query, when you use the word headquarter, do you mean registered and essentially a Vermont Corp? Or do you mean, okay, that's what I thought you meant.
Right, yeah.
Got it.
Are they out of Atlanta selling?
Delaware Corporation, with a big branch here. Yeah,
exactly.
I understand.
I'd like to know just how portable is it for someone who's got the company in Vermont, but they see this and say, well, I don't need to be incorporated here, I'll be incorporated somewhere else with an office here. If you don't spread it across the whole payroll, you're going to see movement. I think you're going to see movement based on taxes of where people are incorporating.
So we can have Abby come and discuss that more too, but I think a huge part of the work we did last year was so that people, was that so that businesses could do that.
It's really a sell.
Yeah.
It's really.
Well, you're talking about a product, but what other kinds of businesses? There are businesses that don't sell
If they
products.
sell in Vermont,
It's the single sales thing that anchors them to this liability,
That's right.
not where they're registered.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry.
We all answered Carol, and I did not give you a chance to answer Carol.
No, I would actually, what Representative Beck said, I would agree with.
I know. And there was a whole bunch, and there's actually a recording on our website of Abby sort of going through how the corporate tax works. But all of the changes we made last year, both the single sales and a whole bunch of other stuff surrounding it, like the Joyce and Family was all about, really, it's very hard for the type of corporate income that we have now to be moved out of state.
Shifted,
yeah. Next slide, let's do it.
Well, I understand this is after this, so I'm standing between you and a break, so
No,
I,
you're not.
so.
You're standing between us and the grade.
So we touched on some of this already, but, so C Corp businesses pay their corporate income tax on their net income in Vermont, right? This is just C corporations. So of roughly the 14,000 corporate income taxpayers, like we said, about 12,000 of them have a annual net income of less than $25,000, so would not be affected by this increase. Of those remaining 2,000, where all of the $19.3 million that we're estimating revenue would be raised, about 200 of them account for 15.5 million of the 19.3. So if we kind of convert some of that into percentages, so you'll see that C Corps with net income greater than $25,000 account for only 14% of filers, or they did in the year that we pulled for the data set. And so those 14% of C Corps pay about 99% of the corporate taxes. So, they're the minority paying the majority, right? But they're also the largest, obviously. And so currently C Corps with net income greater than 1 million pay approximately 77%. So that's above 25,000. Pays about 99%, above $1 million pays about 77%. So it really is the biggest fish are contributing the most into the pot. And that's slide 12. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Going from 8.5 up to 10%, isn't that a big jump? Where do other states fall in their percentage of tax due? Is it around 10 or around 8.5?
Oh, we can come back to this slide here where I did a comparison of what at the 25,000 level.
Yeah.
How that compares to other states at that particular net income level. And you can see currently there's about 5 or 6 states that have a higher rate on net income at where ours kicks in at 25,000.
Would be the highest in the country.
So yes, at 10%, it would be the highest applied at that particular income level, but New Jersey still would have a higher top marginal rate than we do.
You answered my question precisely beforehand, and I don't know where my brain was. Yeah, it says it right here. Thank you.
And to avoid being an outlier, it's good to know if we picked another interval, say 500,000, would we still remain the distinction of being the highest or not? And I'd prefer not being an outlier. And I don't know from what you just said whether we would or we wouldn't at a different trigger.
So there is a great resource that the Tax Foundation has on their website that really goes, it gives you the full picture of all the brackets and all the rates that all the states have. So I'd be happy to, I'll pull that link and I can send it to Sorsha to distribute. And quickly before we take a break, we've talked about C Corps. We're not done with businesses yet. What we'll talk about next when we come back is pass-through income.
Yes, yeah.
We love pass-through income.
So we're gonna take a break now. Till 45. Curious.
Hopefully it's flat.
Oh.
Have to go.
I know it's over stopping at 11:30.
Some of us won't be available
Some of
from
us won't be
10:45 to 11.
Indeed. So we're gonna be back here at 10. Let's
At 11.
We'll come back here at 11. We're gonna work for a half hour.